The world of Social Security can be so complicated. Well, we have answers for you today, and by the end of this video, you will gain clarity for your personal retirement plan and have action items to secure your retirement.
To learn more about securing your retirement and all the different elements you need to know, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified when we post a video every Monday. We have helped hundreds of our clients gain clarity and get on the path to a comfortable and happy retirement. Now it's your turn. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Monday podcast, where we try to always bring somebody that we can interview that's an expert in the area, different areas of retirement, getting ready for retirement. And I will say that one of the biggest questions that Merce and I get questioned on is Social Security. So today we have an expert, Heather Schreiber, who is somebody that we've actually partnered with because of what she knows about Social Security. And she actually helps make sure that we're not missing anything, because the topic of Social Security can be rather complicated. So let me just say this first. Thank you so much, Heather, for coming on and answering our questions on this topic of Social Security.
Pleasure to be here.
Great. So, people ask all the time a ton of questions. Merce and I, whenever we're building retirement financial plans, Social Security is one of the biggest things that we help people navigate and help people think through. I guess, though, the question comes down to, most times people are wondering, when should I take Social Security? And they, you can find articles, you can find all kinds of things that will tell you, always wait until the last time, because by waiting, they throw that number out there, you get an 8%, jump every year by waiting. But is it just that simple that we would wait until 70 if we possibly can, or what else do we need to consider? Can you help our listeners understand how you help us think on that?
Sure. I don't like, always, it's always best to do this or that. And that's what you tend to find. Of course, there are some benefits to waiting until 70. You get the maximum benefit. But if it were that easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I think that, you really need to look at the individual or the couple, if you're working with a couple, and determine what is best for them. There's a lot of things that go into it. Some people will say, gosh, I can't wait until 70. This is going to be the primary income source that I have in retirement. In fact, more than half of folks rely on it for at least 50% of their income, and quite a few also rely on it for more than 90%. So sometimes it just comes down to, I'm leaving the workforce. I don't have the ability to continue to work in any capacity, and so I have to take it. Of course, what also comes into play is health. We don't have a crystal ball, but we have to look at the longevity, and certainly looking at the longevity expectation of the couple. That's when you can get into trouble. I hear people say, well, what's my break even? I'm sure you've heard this too. People are always saying, from a numeric standpoint, when does it make more sense for me to go ahead and file at 62, which is the earliest I can file, versus waiting until my full retirement age, which now ranges anywhere between 66 and 67, or waiting until 70. And you have to be careful with that too. A break even, we can look at that as a starting point, but when you're working with couples, you certainly have to look at a lot of things, like what's the age disparity between the couple? Or what's the income disparity? Is there one? Do we have one spouse that worked primarily outside the home, and we have one that perhaps was raising children for a bit or not working at all? Those things all come into play. So while I'd say, it would be great if everyone could wait until 70 to secure that highest benefit, you really have to look at everything, including other assets they have saved for retirement, what types of assets those are. So I would say steer clear of articles or people that say everyone should do this or everyone should do that, and really look to find someone who is willing to sit down and really analyze your particular situation.
So I think everything that you just said there is spot on. I mean, Ray and I, we talk about it from a more holistic look and say, well, every situation is different, every family is different, and that's why everybody's retirement plan should be catered to them. And part of that is figuring out the Social Security question, which is a huge one. And it's a big decision to make. Everyone gets overwhelmed with the thought of how am I going to retire? When am I going to retire? And now the Social Security thing should be taken as heavily as that question of when can I retire? So I think your response there is perfect. It's spot on. And the summary there is that there is no one answer. And we do have to really do some work and think about everything, not just, hey, how can I get the most from Social Security? It needs to be, how can I make Social Security work the best for me?
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Yeah. And Murs, I would add to that, the pension, this is for many people, the pension of their retirement, right? Pensions are going away, at least in the public sector. We do have some, pensions that's still for federal employees or teachers and those folks. But for the most part, this is going to be the pension for many Americans. And so I say to them, if you had the opportunity to have a pension and when you're getting ready to retire, and if you've seen it, they give you options. Do I take it as a single life? Do I take it qualified joint and survivor 50% or whatever? It's a very important decision. And this is no different because this is likely going to be the pension for many of us.
That is spot on. So, so that's good. A very good high level overview as to, I think Braden and I, and now Heather, we all agree, we're all on the same page here that, we need to think through this, but let's get into some of the technical stuff because a lot of our clients really haven't applied yet, and they're trying to figure it out themselves. A lot of our listeners in the same boat. And so let's talk about, what if we decide, so you mentioned you can take it as early as 62,
right?
And there's full retirement age. That's around 66 or 67, depending on when you're born. And the latest is 70. So if someone is thinking about taking it before their full retirement age, what are some things they need to think about there as far as maybe their income or taxes or anything like that?
Yeah. So what I would say, when I work with producers or advisors that are working with a couple and they say, at least one of them or a single person is considering filing early, the very first question I always want to know is, are they working? Because there is a limit on how much someone can earn and collect a benefit before full retirement age. So that's one thing. So for example, if someone's under full retirement age for the entire year, this year in 2021, if they earn more than $18,960, there's an annual earnings test. And it simply says that if you earn more than that, then the amount of that income over that limit is going to reduce or withhold the benefits by half of that. So a lot of folks don't understand how this works, and they are surprised to learn that, let's suppose someone has $10,000 over the limit on earnings. That means that $5,000 of their benefit will be withheld if they claim before full retirement age. And what happens is when you're trying to plan income, that withholding of that $5,000 occurs before any dollar is paid. Meaning if someone has, let's say $2,000 a month as their benefit amount, they're not going to collect a benefit until month 4, because 5,000 divided by 2.5 is 2.5 months. They round it to 3. And so they don't get that benefit until month 4. People that aren't prepared for that are obviously planning for income. That can be a problem. So that's always the first question that I ask. The other is, even if they're not, if they say, no, I'm retired, I want to go ahead and take my benefit, they need to understand, obviously, that there is a reduction, and it's generally a permanent one that will last for as long as they live. And if they have a spouse that's working, so they don't have a problem with the annual earnings test because a spouse's earnings won't affect them there, then they might have a tax issue. So you have to look at all of the sources of income that's going to supplement that Social Security benefit to say, hey, does it make sense to make an early claim, knowing that it's going to be permanently reduced based upon the number of months early that we make the claim? Do we have an issue with the earnings limitation? And if we don't, that's great. But then do we have an issue with potentially getting a net benefit that isn't the same as the gross because of earnings from a spouse, for example? So you have to look at that. Now, if we're talking about a single person, it becomes a much easier conversation to have. If they say, you know what, I'm not working, I don't have the earnings test issues. This is my source of retirement income. I don't expect to live, let's say they're, everyone in their family died relatively young, then that's an easier conversation in terms of, it might make sense for you to go ahead and file, because if you don't expect to live as long, then it could make sense cumulatively from a break-even standpoint. But there's a lot of things to think about. What other sources of income are going to supplement this is one of them because of the taxes.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's very, very good to think through. Now, before we started recording this episode, we were asking and we were talking about this old thing that went away called file and suspend, which went away, you said, in 2016.
Right.
But then you mentioned something that you feel is underutilized today, and that's called a restricted application. Could you explain to our listeners what that is and why that could potentially be a benefit?
Yeah, so restricting an application has a short shelf life in terms of folks that can utilize it, there's still some out there. They have to have been born by January 1st, 1954. That's the birth date. If you are born by that date, your ears need to perk up, because this strategy allows you to file first for spousal benefits. Now, these folks are already at least 67 at this point. So, the people that I see that don't utilize it that could are the ones that maybe plan on waiting until an advanced age to claim, as late as age 70. But it allows them to file first for spousal benefits. They're restricting their application to spousal benefits only. So that's 50% of the primary insurance amount of their spouse. And they're allowing their own benefits to earn those coveted delayed retirement credits to the tune of 8% per 12 months of delay. So this is a strategy, again, for someone who hasn't yet filed for benefits, who plans to wait until a later age 70, let's say, who meets that birth date requirement. The other critical component of that is that they have to have a spouse that is either filed for benefits or is willing to, because the file and suspend, the other side of that coin that Marcia, you mentioned, is no longer. So in order for the restricted application strategy to be used, the spouse that you want to restrict from has to be willing to file or have already filed for a benefit. Now, that's a lot to take in. The point is, if you are in that situation where you've met that birth date requirement, then you need to talk to someone, because that is an opportunity to get income while you're allowing your own benefit to grow.
Okay, so I want to make sure I follow that up, because I just want to give like an example.
Okay.
So let's say that we've got a couple, and the one is started taking Social Security, whenever they did it. So let's just say that the couple, I guess, is the same age, right? So you got 67 and 67. So the one of the couple says they're going to file, they're going to go ahead and take their Social Security. And let's just make all these numbers easy. And let's say their Social Security is $2,000 a month.
Okay.
Right. So now, if the person who has not filed yet, they could file a restricted application, restricting themselves to just spousal benefits.
Right.
So they're going to get half of the $2,000 because they're the same age. So they're going to get $1,000.
Right.
And then their benefit, though, is still growing until they're age 70, and then they can turn theirs on.
Yep. So their benefit would be, without any cost of living adjustments, $2,640, right? So they're able to collect that $1,000. And then when they turn over to their own benefit, that $2,000, because of the 32% increase, has increased to $2,640. Now, one thing I'll say about that example, that's a great example, but they both don't have to meet the birth date requirement. So let me tweak that example a little bit and say, okay, let's suppose that the wife is the one that goes ahead and files, and she's 65. Okay, that's fine. She has to file, though. And even if she files early, that $2,000 won't be the full amount, because she's filing at 65, but the spouse is still going to get half of her $2,000, because he's over full retirement age, right? Okay. So that's a common misconception. People say, well, we both have to meet that January 1st, 1954 birth date requirement, and that isn't the case.
Just the one who's restricted?
Just the one. Yes, just the one. The
Okay.
other one has to file, though.
Yeah.
So it works that way too.
Okay. Well, that's a very, very huge benefit that I think is being really overlooked right now.
I probably discover at least 2 a week in consulting, but they're missing that. And so the other thing with that is, I've come into situations where they could have filed already, right? They're 67 or they're even 68 at this point. They're planning to wait until 70. Their spouse filed a long time ago. They can not only restrict, but they can also ask for 6 months of retroactive spousal benefits. That's the maximum you can go. You can only go back 6 months or back to full retirement age, whichever is less. But they could also get 6 months of retroactive benefits if they discover it after the fact.
Yeah, definitely. Even just walking through that example and the way that you explained it makes it clear to me that, everyone should be really taking a good look at and analyzing what their options are. And unfortunately, sometimes it's just, well, I'm 67, so I'll just go ahead and file at 67 without looking at all the different options that are out there. So now we have kept saying this word, and you briefly explained it, but I think it's important enough to come back to, and that's the spousal benefit.
Yeah.
So how does that work? You said 50%, but it's not as simple as just 50%, right? So let's take an example of someone who does wait until 70 and maybe their spouse is 62. And let's say that 70 benefit, to make it easy, is $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
and the spouse wants to file and is going to use a spousal benefit, but they say, I want to take it at 62. Do they get 50% of that amount?
No. So they also don't get 50% of the 70. So at the very base, the maximum spousal benefit is always 50% of the primary insurance amount, I'll say, of the higher earning spouse, let's just say. Okay. So instead of that $3,000 a month benefit, let's suppose that that person's primary insurance amount is more like $2,400. The maximum spousal benefit, regardless of when that person files, the higher earner files, is always going to be to start at 50% of, in my example, $2,400 or $1,200. Okay. That's the starting point. Whether or not I'll call the dependent spouse collects the full $1,200 is going to be based upon when they file for the benefit. And that is a huge point of misconception for folks. They always think, well, I'm going to get either half of what the age 70 benefit is because my spouse waited to 70, or conversely, they might think, well, my spouse filed early, so now I'm only entitled to 50% of their age 62 benefit. And that is not the case. The starting point is always, regardless of when that higher wage earner files, 50% of their primary insurance amount, which is the amount they would collect at full retirement age. Okay. Whether or not they get that depends upon when that dependent spouse files for it. So if they file at 60, there could be as much as a 30% reduction. And it works just like it would for retirement benefits. The earlier you take it before full retirement age, the more it will be reduced. So for someone with a 67 full retirement age, it could be reduced by as much as 35%. So it's going to be somewhere between 30 and 35% if they collect it as soon as they're able to. Now, the other thing you got to keep in mind is, remember, spousal benefits are not on the table until that higher wage earner files for benefits. So if in this case, let's say we have a 62-year-old and a 70-year-old, or let's make it easier. Let's say we've got a 65-year-old and a 70-year-old, the 70-year-old being the higher wage earner. That person, the 70-year-old, has to file before the 65-year-old could even begin to say, hey, help pay me a spousal benefit. So that's important to know too.
Okay. Yeah. I think, just listening to it, I always, hear these things, and you're able to, because you do this every day, just go through all this, and Merce and I do this every day, but yet, it's overwhelming sometimes just to think it through. And I just, as I'm listening to it, basically saying, all right, I hope everybody listening says, if I'm not taking Social Security, I do not want to do this without somebody helping me think it through.
And that's the challenge. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. You're so passionate about it, because it is such an incredibly important decision. And the reality is, now we have the challenges of the field offices being closed. But if someone goes into Social Security expecting to get help with how to make that decision or how to do it, they're not going to get it from the Social Security offices. And the reason is they're specifically prohibited from giving anything that looks like advice. So you really have to go in there empowered. You have to know what you know and be prepared before you go in, which is why it's so incredibly important to work with someone who can help you navigate it. Because yes, I know it because I live and breathe it, but someone that's just new to this really needs to kind of work with someone that can help them navigate all of the things that need to be considered when making that very important decision.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there. I've got one more technical type of question. I think we've already given enough out here to probably make people think. But my last question here is, as far as the spouse. So let's go to the scenario of the higher earning spouse. What happens if that higher earning spouse that has the higher Social Security and they've already filed for it? What happens if they pass away? How does that work in that family?
Okay, so when you're talking about spousal or even ex-spousal benefits, for folks that were married for at least 10 plus years, you're always, the maximum was always going to be 50% of that other spouse's primary insurance amount, the amount at full retirement age. What's different with survivor benefits is not only is it not 50%, it's 100%, but the earliest benefit age at which a survivor can collect a benefit goes from 62 to 60. Sometimes 50 if they were disabled within 7 years of death, but in general, it's 60. So the big takeaway with that is you're dealing with a higher benefit base. The base amount that a survivor would receive is 100% of what the deceased spouse was collecting at the time of their death or entitled to collect at the time of their death. Now, that also includes delayed retirement credits that deceased spouse may have earned. So that's why it's so incredibly important when you're dealing with married couples, particularly when there's a disparity in income benefits. Let's suppose the younger spouse has a much smaller benefit as in this case, we're using this example of, a lower earning spouse. What happens when one spouse dies is one of those benefits is going to go away, and it's the lower one. So that's step number one. You need to understand that they're not going to continue to collect both. They're going to collect the higher. So they will then step up to what that deceased spouse was collecting at the time of their death that they were collecting. Whether or not they get the full 100% is based on what? When they file for it. So if that person is long past full retirement age when their spouse passes, then they're going to step up to collect exactly what that deceased spouse was collecting. If they're under full retirement age and they choose to collect it early, so let's say that that's the only benefit that they're entitled to, they didn't have their own retirement benefit, then it's going to be reduced based upon the number of months before their full retirement age they collect it. So big takeaway there is, delayed retirement credits earned by the higher earning spouse are inherited by the surviving spouse. Okay, so that's critical. And that's why when we're talking about this break even conversation, what's my break even? When you're a couple, you have to look at the longevity of both of them, but also look at what the higher wage earning spouse does in terms of file date is going to impact adversely or positively the survivor income for whichever of the two survives the other.
Okay. So you said something there, just made me think of one other question on this. If go to a scenario where somebody was married to somebody for longer than 10 years.
Okay.
And they are divorced or death, either one, I guess. That person, well, no, they're not death. I guess divorce is my bigger question. So they can still file spousal benefit on that from that relationship, from that marriage, right?
Depends. So okay. Yes, if there is a marriage, if someone was married for 10 plus years, even if they were married more than once at 10 plus years a shot, and if that benefit, if what that benefit under their former spouse, that ex-spousal benefit is greater than their own. Now I'm talking about people born after January 1st, 1954 now. If they've earned their own retirement benefit and that ex-spousal benefit is greater than their own, they absolutely can file for it. Okay. Retirement benefits, we didn't really get into this, but folks born after January 1st, 1954 can't use the restricted application strategy. And so they fall into a category called deemed filing. And that essentially means if they have their own retirement benefit, it's always going to be paid first. If the ex-spousal or spousal, as the case may be, produces a higher benefit, then they'll get the difference to bring them up to that higher benefit amount. So yes, if someone was married for more than 10 years, their former spouse is still living, and they're currently unmarried, then they can collect, if it's higher than their own retirement benefit, or if they don't have one at all, they can collect as much as 50% as an ex-spousal benefit. Mm-hmm. Okay, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, but if they're remarried, then it voids that.
So suppose they were collecting the ex-spousal benefit for a while and then they walk down the aisle again, then those benefits would stop while that former spouse was still living. Now, I don't know if you're going to pivot to this, but I will.
Okay.
If instead this ex-spouse passes, okay, still the 10 plus requirement, the 10 plus of marriage requirement is necessary. But let's suppose we're now talking about a former spouse that has passed away. If the former spouse, or if the now living spouse doesn't remarry until at least 60, then they can still collect the survivor benefits from that former spouse. And this also applies to currently married spouses. If spouses are married, one passes away, as long as the surviving spouse remarries at 60 or later, they can still collect the survivor benefit from that former spouse. That's important because typically a survivor benefit is going to be higher than the spousal benefits from the new spouse, right? Because remember, the spousal benefit while a spouse is living is capped at 50% of full retirement age benefit. Survivor benefits are capped at 100% of what that deceased spouse was collecting. So remarriage at 60 or later. And I always remind people of that. Of course, people that have just gone through, the loss of a spouse aren't thinking about it. But if we're dealing with young widow and widowers, it's something that you need to think about because it's a source of income that they can count on if they remarry at 60 or later.
Gotcha. So you already kind of mentioned it. When you decide to start to actually file for Social Security, don't expect to get any advice from the other person on the other side of the phone. But can you just give us an idea? What is the process like when someone decides they're ready to file? They know what they want to do. What should they do, and how quickly should they do it before they turn that age?
Okay. So generally speaking, you should, if you should plan to file 3 to 4 months before you want to receive your first check. The easiest way to do most filings is the online portal. It's very self-explanatory. You can even restrict an application on the online portal. So if you have a My Social Security account, you can go right in there, and I don't even think you have to have one. You can actually do one without it, but you can go in, and what I always suggest, it'll ask you for some critical information about, your age, your work history, and so forth. But I always say, when in doubt, put everything you want to have happen in the remarks section. At the very end of that online application, there's a remarks section, and you always reiterate what it is that you're trying to do. So if, for example, you're trying to restrict your application because you fall into that category of lucky folks, then you would say something like, I am filing a restricted application. I am not filing for retirement benefits. They are not within the scope of this application. So that's something I would do. So that's one way. You can make a phone appointment to talk to someone live, or you can just call and get the luck of the draw and hold until you get somebody. I think that the call times have gotten, or the hold times rather, have gotten better. But by far the best way to do it is to go online and do it, and then it'll give you a confirmation number, and you can go back into that application. You don't have to do it all at once. So that's probably the easiest way to do it until the field office is open.
Well, Heather, your expertise is certainly very, very helpful. And just to explain, I want to say this again. We actually have, in all essence, hired Heather to help us, and so we pay her money annually to make sure that we can answer all these questions. So if you're listening and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to have an analysis on my Social Security, I'm thinking I'm, teetering right now on exactly how to do it. The way it would work is basically you can go to our website. If you go to pomwealth.net, at the very top, you can see there a place that you can actually schedule a complimentary 15-minute phone conversation. And then if we get that information, then we work along with Heather to make sure that we're going to give you the best advice possible and hopefully be able to help you understand all these things. So Heather, thank you so much for coming on. It has just been fantastic and a lot of good information.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure.
We hope this video has given you some confidence and clarity as you plan for a worry-free life in retirement. But what else do you need? We have created a complimentary video course called 3 Keys to Secure Your Retirement. This video walks you through step by step what you need to do to get ready for retirement. You can also check out our podcast called Secure Your Retirement. You can subscribe below.
For more retirement tips, watch this video. Create your retirement income plan. Also, click here to subscribe to our podcast, Secure Your Retirement. If you like this video, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends.